Thank you. Good morning. Now that we have the logistics, we had the opportunity together to pray this morning for those of us here at the Cave of Manresa, but as we were told, we have about 1,400 people joining us from all parts of the world. And we know this is truly an international conference because I believe it is about 9:30 here in Manresa. And I know for George, I think it's about 1:30 in the afternoon. And for me, it's about 2:30 in the morning. So I'll do my best. But I thought we would begin as we consider the person of conscience by asking those internationally to join together in prayer. So let's begin in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Eternal Lord of all things, we ask you and your Spirit to be with us as we begin our day together across the world, which is truly our house for the service of our mission. And we pray together, glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, a world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. I would like to encourage and repeat a few things as the moderator today that you were asked. First of all, we will have opportunities following the lecture for brief reflection and then discussion. And so to facilitate that conciseness of 3 minutes that you were requested, obviously you've been given a pen and a journal. To be able to organize your thinking, please certainly continue to take notes along the way for those things that you would wish to share when we get to the discussion portion. So today we are focused on the person of conscience, and after a lecture and some discussion, we're going to hear from two other presenters on experiences, as well as in the afternoon, two reflectors on this topic. Each time we'll be gathering back in one form or another for reflection and discussion. It's my pleasure to introduce our first lecturer this morning, Father George Nedumatam. He is from India, and he is currently the principal of St. Xavier's School in Bhatia, India. He joined the society in 1985 and was ordained in 2000. He has a Bachelor of Science in Statistics from the University of Madras, a Master's in Human Resource Management from Pondicherry University, and a Master's in Education from Loyola University in Chicago. Following his ordination, he was the Vice Principal of St. Michael's School in Patna, India, and then the Vice Principal of K.R. School in Bhatia, India, and served from 2006 to 2013 as the principal of St. Xavier's School in Patna, India, and he is currently again the principal of St. Xavier's School in Bhatia, India. In addition to his leadership as an administrator, he is constantly working with students and faculty on leadership development. And so to begin our dialogue on the person of conscience, it's my pleasure to introduce our first lecturer, Father George Nedumatam.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and it is good to be here. It is a pleasant experience of being at the cave of St. Ignatius. Something that we all dreamt. I'm a little emotional. Because it is from here the society grew, established, and it is this place that makes it possible for us to be here. And so it is my pleasure to move ahead of the process that we began by presenting the papers, entering into a virtual discussion, and now being able to proceed further into this in-person Sipei and also the virtual Sipei that is going side by side. The beginning of my presentation today, I would like to summarize in short the paper that was already presented to you in the month of April on the person of conscience, Jesuit education forming men and women of conscience. The second part of my presentation today will be an incorporation of the fruits of our discussion that took place, and then I will respond to some of the questions that were raised during the discussion that we already had. So, we are gathered here at the end of 400 years of fruitful mission in Jesuit education. And we have practiced the Ignatian pedagogy paradigm. We defined the characteristics of Jesuit education towards the end of the 20th century as a response to the need to renew our process of continuing our education ministry. And we need to remember that the founding of the Society of Jesus itself was a response to the need of the hour. It was not a planned activity, but it was a response to the need of the hour, guided by the Spirit and undertaken through the discernment through spiritual exercises. And therefore, we shall not be surprised when we come to know that in 1547, the Pope promulgated the bull Licet Debithum and established the Society of Jesus. The church needed the society to defend its faith, which was being affected by the various schisms that were going all around. And then the society will eventually establish many schools and colleges. And the purpose of establishing these colleges and schools, as we hear from our forefathers, it is helping the neighbors through the education of the youth in letters, learning, and Christian life. We need to keep this in mind. We need to keep this focus even today. And as Ignatius and his companions would continue with his mission, it would become an integral part of their mission that they need to train the men who were joining the society. Along with that, there were requests from the people all around. It is not only for the men who are entering the society, but even people who are in general looking for education be provided with the same education. And that is why in a decade, the Jesuits will earn the name of being the schoolmasters of Europe for the way they conducted their education. And therefore, we have these two specific mission that is assigned to Jesuit education right at the beginning, forming the men who were entering the society and also the students in general who needed the education that the society was providing. And then we have the Ratio Studiorum, promulgated in 1599, the way and the method of study in the Society of Jesus, which became, and even today, is the foundation of our education, Jesuit education. Having practiced Ratio Studiorum for almost 400 years, towards the end of the 20th century, we once again reinvented our education through the Ignatian pedagogy paradigm, which was an attempt to reinvent Jesuit education and make it relevant. And 10 years later, we defined the characteristics of Jesuit education. That was the need of the hour. And it is the need of the hour today that we make our Jesuit education continue to be relevant and focused. And now, what are the models that they used. The modus parisiensis, about which we will discuss a little later when we begin to talk about the two core values that Ignatius held close to his heart, eruditio and pietas. We will be discussing about it a little more. And the studium generale, which they started to cater to the need of the students, and the main manifold ministries of the society being undertaken under the guidance and inspiration of the Holy Spirit. In the 20th century and early 21st century, we were with a sense of a need that we need to reinvent ourselves. And that is why we had the characteristics of Jesuit education and also the IPP, the Ignatian pedagogy paradigm. Then when we look outside, we come to global challenges that the society and also education was facing. There are growing demands for education. On the one side, there was growing demand for quality education. We may need to define what this quality education is. At the same time, there was a demand for universalizing education because a large population of the world remain illiterate even today. So there is a need for universalizing education as well. The challenges that we face, the utilitarian outlook towards education, where the fruits of education is equated based on the productivity or the profit that an education person can bring about in terms of business and economy, that is a challenge for the Society of Jesus. Digital learning, homeschooling, distance education, new ways of teaching and learning, taking students away from the rigors of learning which otherwise is practiced in schools is also a challenge. And today we are told knowledge is at your fingertips. The knowledge explosion, technological advancements, not bad. But how are we going to incorporate this into our education? The quality and the method of education as well, there is a disparity. There is a difference. In some part of the world, it is available. In some parts, it's not available. Aren't we Jesuits called to respond to this challenge as well? And while we try to respond to these challenges that were enumerated, we once again, we need to keep ourselves rooted. The formation of human persons is our primary goal in Jesuit education. And therefore, this response of St. Ignatius to the Duke of Bravia, that we tend in our colleges to stress the formation for life rather than the acquisition of knowledge. For Ignatius, it was formation more important than the acquiring of knowledge. And that explains the purpose of our education. And the two core values that Ignatius exposed to the world, eruditio and pietas. And I would once again recall what Father Gisbert Souch said, that we should not immediately transfer and translate these two words into erudition and piety. But we need to understand that eruditio is the acquisition and integration of knowledge, while pietas is the acquisition of life skills based on the eruditio that we are acquiring in our education. And we come to what Father Kolwenbach told us, that in our education we are forming men and women of competence, conscience, and compassionate commitment. And therefore, we come to the topic of our discussion today, formation of men and women of conscience in Jesuit education. We come to the term conscience itself. Encyclopedia Britannica, from where I began my discussion, defines conscience as personal sense of the moral goodness or blameworthiness of one's own conduct, intentions, or character with regard to a feeling obligation to do right or to be good. Let us be very clear, we are not reducing conscience to a mere mechanism where we can choose between good and bad, right or wrong. We shall try to come to a common understanding of this term before we move to the next stage, or the practicability of forming men and women. Along with that, we also take a look at the various religious expositions on conscience, or how various spiritualities enlighten us about this concept of conscience. In Christianity, it is an inner voice calling us to live with the Spirit of the risen Christ, because we believe that it is the Spirit of the risen Christ that animates, regulates, and inspires our human life. And if the Spirit of the risen Christ animates, regulates, and inspires, then naturally it will lead us to righteous actions and behaviors. It is a call to come near to God, principle and foundation of the spiritual exercises. In Hindu spirituality, it is an indestructible element which guides one's actions and life. In Hindu philosophy, they would call it Atman, which usually is translated as the soul, which may not be the accurate translation because it is little more than just the soul. But the purpose is to attain moksha, that is union with God, which they understand that they can be achieved by one's dharma or right actions. And why it has to be? Because one has to be released, the soul has to be released from the samsara, that is the birth, death, the cycle of death and life, until one is fully liberated to be in union with God. And in Hindu philosophy, it is believed that this can be achieved by right actions. My own actions, which are right, which will release me. So therefore, it calls for a moral life in our own living. We come to another spirituality. Their whole understanding of conscience is defined based on the ability of the conscience to discern between right and wrong. That is, the purpose is to develop nafs-e mutmina, that is, a self-contented and satisfied and is unified with Allah. That is, a conscience that is competent to differentiate between right and wrong. And they believe that there are two kinds of conscience, pure conscience and bad conscience. Pure conscience leads one to good actions. So Islamic spirituality as well invites people to this kind of an understanding of conscience. In other religions, in Buddhism, the purpose is to attain nirvana. Once again, it is liberation from this world, from this life. And Gautam Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, he advocated the 8 eightfold path, which in other words is an explanation of right thinking, right way of living, and the path that he has explained. It is always the right actions. And in Jainism, we have the triple gems that will lead every human person to an infiniteness of existence. So in this way, when we look at various spiritualities, we realize that every spirituality or philosophy is calling persons to engage themselves in action towards the realization and experience of God. And in every religion or every spirituality, it accepts the innate ability of persons to decide and discern good from bad and right from wrong. This we find as a common thread between spiritualities and religions. Now, I am trying to incorporate what we discussed in our virtual discussion in the month of April. There was a challenge for us to clarify what this term or what is our common understanding, because there are differences of this word or its nuances because of the language or the background or the cultural background of the particular language that we are using. Now, for example, being conscious person, as it is in Spanish, I am told, consciente. It may not be an adequate translation of what we understand when we talk about conscience. I was also told that the person of conscience, la conciencia, the noun form, may be closer. But only our Spanish colleagues here can explain to us what is the difference in the nuance of this word. But let us try to understand what is conscious. In a medical context, social or ethical, or in a particular context when we talk about. In a medical context, if we tell that a person is conscious, that means he or she is aware of the senses. He can respond to certain stimuli. The person is conscious. In a social context, the person is conscious when we talk about, it means that person is aware of the events that are taking place. He or she is aware of the events and how he or she needs to respond to that. Can the concept of conscious person be understood as included in the person of conscience? I would like to use an example from the gospel. The man who was traveling to Jericho and who was attacked by the dacoits or the bandits, whoever they were, and the priest, seeing him fallen and wounded, walking by, the Levite walking by, and the man who was no one of his helping him. I shall explain. The priest who went along looked at the person and went. He was conscious of what has happened. This man is injured. He was conscious. He was aware. So was the case with his assistant. They knew, they were aware, but there was no response from their side. So I would consider the first two were conscious of what has happened, but they were not persons of conscience which enabled or inspired them to respond. And I think that is the difference we would make. We simply cannot reduce a person of conscience as choosing between good or bad, right or wrong. Now, our question that we could debate and discuss: does conscience lead us to having clear ethics, a sense inspired by the gospel and Ignatian spirituality, and serve as a guide to serve and build, putting the common good first with humility, whether it enables or inspires us to move ahead. And finally, this is what I am defining conscience as: the capacity to correctly analyze the world and its events so as to make correct decisions that drive us towards meaning in our lives. And that would involve being aware of our context and our experiences, analyzing the context and the experiences, and then choosing a response, not only between good and bad, not only between right and wrong, and at times even between choices that are both good. We have to make a choice of what is better. And when we understand conscience in that way, the challenges that the society faces today, we need to keep in mind that the society was always ready to face challenges and respond to it, whatever the challenges were. And today, when education is viewed all over the world in a utilitarian terms, and employability, that is, someone who is educated, whether he or she can be profitably employed, that becomes the touchstone to decide the success or failure of education. The society is expected to respond. And how do we respond? The IPP, the characteristics of Jesuit education, they have become much more relevant today than it was earlier. Therefore, our response in the formation of men and women of conscience need to be a reinventing and a rejuvenation of these core practices of the society and Jesuit education. The second major question that came up in our discussion was eruditio and pietas, whether the duality of these two core values, whether it is a challenge for us, and whether eruditio is the same as the way Saint Ignatius understood excellence, and whether pietas, that is, the acquiring of life skills, is the same or is a continuation of eruditio in line with the way Saint Ignatius understood. And the major question was, what is preventing us, those involved in Jesuit education, from promoting eruditio and pietas in our pedagogy today? It is a serious question we need to answer. Now, to understand these 2 points or core values of Ignatius, we need to understand why Ignatius adopted modus parisiensis as the way to be followed in our schools, whereas they had the choice between the Paris model and the model of Bologna. It was a deliberate choice that Ignatius and his companions made. In both the places, the students and the teachers, the professors, made a community. The difference was, in Paris model, the professors had the power, not the power to impose things on them, to decide the course of action. In the Bologna model, it was vice versa. The students had the decision-making power, what kind of procedures, what kind of courses to proceed. And therefore, Ignatius and his companions chose this model, Paris model. It was not simply a follow-up because Ignatius and his companions They themselves were educated in modus parisiensis. But it was not a natural choice, it was a deliberate choice. The quest for excellence while making sure excellence in Jesuit education. What are the opportunities that we have? How do we respond to this eruditio pietas debate that is taking place? The way Ignatius dealt with the retreatants, that he needed to understand the retreatant and how much the retreatant is capable of undertaking. It was not everyone being given the same spiritual exercises, depending on the ability and the willingness of the retreatant. Ignatius guided them. And similarly, when we talk about education, we need to deal with our students exactly the way Ignatius dealt with his retreatants. It may not be always possible, but it is a challenge. And what is the challenge? The challenge has to be shared. The vision has to be shared with all our stakeholders, the educators, the parents, and our associates, and our students as well. And the educators, in today's world, it is a greater challenge. We are not merely knowledge providers. We are formators. We are forming men and women of conscience. And therefore, every educator in a Jesuit institution should be influenced by Ignatian spirituality and Ignatian legacy. The training of educators as people of conscience is necessary for them to facilitate forming men and women of conscience. Another group of stakeholders, the parents and our associates, they have the primary responsibility towards the children. But today, there is a change in the outlook of families. We have single-parent families. We have issues of separated families. We have students coming from different backgrounds, so they come with a different and heavier baggage to our institutions, hoping that we will be able to help them. The socio-cultural religious influences. Therefore, there is a need for us, those of us who are in education, to engage the parents and our associates. Our main stakeholder in this whole process is our students. We are not educating them in vacuum. They are our focal point. They have an understanding of success and excellence. And they also have a tendency not to accept what is in tune with their way and value system. And therefore, the whole relevance of Ignatian pedagogy paradigm becomes paramount today. I'm making a few suggestions. Networking. Jesuit schools, we are not individual schools. We are not individual institutions trying to achieve various things. We need to network. We need to collaborate. We need to share what we are doing. And today, we are aided by technology. So we cannot simply say that we are doing well, we need to share. I'll make a few suggestions in this regard as well. Remember, I talked about three stakeholders: the educators, the parents, and the students. I'm making a few suggestions for the educators. How we as leaders in Jesuit institutions can cater to the need of the educator to be relevant and people who are rooted in Jesuit education and legacy. I'm making 5 suggestions just to begin our process of discussions. Number 1, every educator in our institutions to be familiarized with Ignatian legacy through various programs. Number 2, to provide opportunities to practice the spiritual exercises. Maybe a call to renew the practice of the 19th annotation retreat. And the third suggestion is to educate and train our educators in the whole exercises of the Ignatian examen. It is a daily exercise. It is in the context of the examen that God intervenes in our lives. And therefore, we need to train our educators in this. And then, of course, once again, concretize the Ignatian pedagogy paradigm and the characteristics of Jesuit education in our institutions. Coming to the students, we need to specifically care for our students because of the global understanding, because of the surrounding that they are coming from. Number 1, involve the surroundings and context of the individuals and create opportunities to make them conscious of their context. That is, the reality of their life is to be brought into the classroom. And the second, taking advantage of these experiences and context, any moment in the classroom can become an activity towards formation of conscience. Number 3, offer opportunities and spaces for the students to enter into a reflection based on their experiences and the events that they undertake and they go through. And while we are doing this, remember to work with different personal dimensions. That is, their sensibility, their memory, their conscience, their intuition, etc. In other words, accompany them in this process, what we call cura personalis in our own formation, which enables them to form themselves as persons of conscience. And we as educators need to work on the content and the curriculum as well, not simply undertaking the curriculum that is given to us, but taking it and adapting it in such a way that we are able to fulfill the goal that we have in providing Jesuit education. And then maybe help the students, the children, to maintain a personal notebook or a diary. This was suggested in our discussion as well. And finally, with regard to networking, I have a few suggestions to make. And once again, I say these suggestions are only to begin our discussion process. Making a few concrete suggestions with regard to networking, that is, to form and develop a core team of Jesuits and educators at the province level, where the outcome of this conference will be put into practice and the same will be ensured by this team. The second suggestion will be to form and develop an implementation team at each school level. We cannot leave it to a team at the province level and ask everybody to follow. We need to put mechanisms in place the way we can formulate and function. And my third suggestion is Jesuit schools that are endowed well may adopt one or two schools that needs both financial and personal resources, and schools that are endowed can help one another. And my fourth suggestion will be create a forum of Jesuit schools to share information and best practices. We have the Secretariat for Education. We have the Secretariat for Education at our country level, province level, but maybe a wider network where this information is constantly being shared. Then undertake collaborative projects between students using technology so that cultural exchanges can take place without much expense that is involved otherwise. Then, of course, explore possibilities of students and educators' exchanges. And my final suggestion in networking is a network or a forum where we make it possible for our schools to interact and collaborate. Like British Council, the British Schools Online, that is a forum where a particular school can present our interests and others would respond, then we can interact with them, enter into projects. There are so many facilities like that, whether something of that kind can we think of and be materialized at the society's level. A forum where Jesuit schools can interact, share, undertake collaborative projects. While we do all this, we need to remember our Ignatian heritage. This will remain with us. No matter how technology develops, no matter how advanced we become, these elements, the spiritual exercises, the Ignatian Examen, the Ratio Studiorum, the characteristics of Jesuit education, and Ignatian pedagogy paradigm, these will remain as the guiding forces of our education. In our daily practice of this, it is possible for us, and it can be worked out, that we define different ways of making these a concrete experience, both for our educators and for our students as well. To conclude, I am once again reminding ourselves what Ignatius told about the formation, that we tend to focus more on formation than the acquisition of knowledge. And therefore, the IPP becomes a key to the formation of our conscience. And to conclude, the formation of conscience will continue to remain our focus in our ministry, and our quest is to find meaning in life and to move towards transcendence, and we are trying to help our students to do this. And finally, our challenge would be that we create and provide a 21st century learning environment to ensure the development and formation of men and women of conscience. Thank you.
Thank you, George. We're going to have a discussion now until about 11 o'clock. But before we begin that discussion, I'd like to encourage everybody just to take 60 seconds of quiet, looking over your notes, and then I'll call on people to begin the discussion. And so trusting that you heard Jose Mesa's insistence for participation, I expect it to be difficult for me to stop us at 11. And I also will not dictate the beginning of the conversation unless that becomes a challenge. So just, again, I would remind you to please keep comments to 3 minutes. And when you do speak, please stand and introduce yourself. Who would like to begin? Please. I think they need the microphone on, Eamon.
George, I enjoyed reading your paper. I wanted to thank you for sharing with us. I have a complaint to the organizers. We've been asked to reduce our topics to 3 minutes. Impossible. I like this slide on the challenges in education, especially explosion of information and so on. I wonder, or do I propose that maybe there's a challenge we should add to that, which is the growing inequality in the world. So in other words, the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer, and not anecdotally, but statistically, this being a fact. And I wonder, is it a challenge for us in our schools, Jesuit schools and Christian schools, to form people of conscience who really understand this, who really know the impact of this, and who are fired to do something about it? Is that maybe a major challenge for us, on top of the other challenges as well? So I just add that to the discussion.
And Eamon, could you just reintroduce yourself and where you're from?
Sure. Eamon McGuinness from Ireland, from Galway, on the west coast of Ireland.
Thank you.
Thank you for the intervention, and I don't know whether I need to respond because he is adding one more challenge to the challenges that we have already enumerated. And I certainly agree with what he said. This inequality is becoming an issue. It is not only limited to a few places, but the inequality. He talked about the rich becoming richer, the poor becoming poorer. I, during my presentation, referred to the inequality in the quality and method of education that is available. So to come back to what the point that he raised, that in that context, to form men and women of conscience, when we have this inequality so clearly exhibited in our own areas by various ways, it is becoming a challenge. It certainly is a challenge. And therefore, some of the suggestions that were raised and brought into that we need to undertake projects where children can interact with children of various socio-political, economic, religious background, that becomes very, very necessary to respond to a challenge of that kind. Because if I am a person endowed with everything, I will have no understanding when I talk about what is hunger unless and until I experience what hunger is. And therefore, it is need for us to provide a platform, a mechanism for the students to understand the reality of the world as it is today, and then to respond to those.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm Father Francis Swan, a Jesuit from India, Bombay province. Today's topic reminds me of our father of nation, Mahatma Gandhi ji, who was a real man of conscience, who had followed the path of this being conscious to himself, to others, to society, and to God. I would like to look at this conscience in the context of Jesuit excellence. India has produced fantastic experts, great cricketers, great businessmen. But I'm not sure. Great businessmen, great cricketers are men of conscience. And therefore, I would like to bring in the point of not so much of competition, but more of excelling with oneself, with one's own capabilities, with one's own potential.
Thank you. That concept of excellence, yes.
Closer? Okay, thank you. I'll try to do it in English, okay? Yeah. Okay. You made the point, and I do agree with that. The Society of Jesus started teaching by teaching their own men. That is, for example, Jesuits being trained to become a Jesuit, novices, juniors, theologians, so on. But likewise, the first schools that the Society of Jesus manned, India, 1542, St. Paul, was for the formation of the candidates to priesthood. That's the bedrock that I want to go back to. Given that that's the history of the beginning of our education, how much are we learning from the way we teach, we form our candidates? How many representatives, for example, are there from the sector of Jesuit formation in this conference? What are the experiences that in India, for example, guide the way ahead in education that are coming out of the experience of the way we train our own men? Thank you.
Yes.
I'm Ben Ebres, a Jesuit from the Philippines. Although I've worked a lot in the university, I have also been very involved for many decades in this problem of inequality. And my experience is that it's important to have our students and our faculty to have real experience of poverty and inequality. But where it has really worked to make a difference is where they work long enough with a group and see that change is possible. That you can actually work with a poor community and spend many years with them, and you find out that they actually can come out. That's the feedback I've gotten. The other one becomes a little bit like poverty tourism. They go there, they're very impressed, but they don't know what to do, so they go on back to their life. So I would add that not only should we make them conscious of inequality and the difference, but to have them conscious and have some experience that it can change. And then they find that they will also try it. They know it will take many years to change, but they've seen it happen, and so they say, I will try to.
Yes, right.
Joseph Carver from the United States, from the Oregon province. One of the struggles that I would add in terms of challenges is in the United States in particular, I see a kind of entitlement that happens in many of our schools. And the entitlement and the opportunities that are given to many of our students. And I agree with Ben that not only through immersion programs is that entitlement addressed. We are certainly excellent at inculcating excellence in our education. But what comes from that, and I believe a deep challenge to add to the list of challenges, is a certain pride that happens in our schools, as opposed to gratitude for what has happened. And when we focus on how proud we are in our schools, I think we deepen the sense of entitlement as opposed to moving to gratitude as Ignatius invites us. It's a real challenge, I know, in the States and perhaps around the world as well.
Thank you, Joseph. This is good. I have the challenge of keeping track of hands up. Casey, if you would go next, and then we're going to come here.
I'm Casey Bomira, a Jesuit of the United States from Boston. I just want to say something about maybe a word missing from our deliberations. I would say in our heritage, we want to talk about formation for influence. Right? In the history of the society, the formation for influence is very important. So this idea of the insignia, those that will have a marking for the society's work into the future, the tension that I think that we'll have in the present and into the near future is that expansion of the pool of people who will have influence. So we want to form the influential, and we want to expand that capacity to make those of the future who will have influence. So this idea of conscience, I think you want to have a consciousness for the formation, for the mission, and to have influence in the future. So a bigger expansion of students in Jesuit schools who will be influential.
Thank you. Up front here.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Luis Tarin of Jesuits Education in Barcelona, Spain, Catalonia. Thank you very much indeed for your contributions and explanations about conscience. And listening to all the people who've spoken before me, I am becoming aware, or conscious, better said, in the fact that being conscious is going beyond understanding and comprehending. The Ignatian spirit leads us to transform, especially. It leads us to change reality. And this awareness, this conscience, without action, cannot be. So then, on the basis of what has been said up till now, and in a Jesuitic key, the 21st century means awareness and conscious towards transformation, and it means to overcome not to be utilitarian any longer, okay? Not so much think in a practical manner, but go beyond. So, being aware, having a conscience, means to look for justice, and not being only utilitarian. I think that the 21st century, and Father George was saying it too, well, in the 21st century, we have to overcome our mutual respect, because mutual respect is not enough. It's not sufficient. We have to influence, and these were words of the person who spoke before me. We have to exert an influence in order to change. We have to exert an influence through discussion and dialogue, because to respect each other without discussion, without dialogue, is not transformation. It won't change anything. And finally, to be in contact is not sufficient either. To be in contact, to be in touch in the 21st century is all very nice and all very well, but we have to be Ignatian, truly Ignatian. If we don't look for love, overcoming contact, if we don't look for love to the others, we are not making the presence of Jesus possible amongst us. So, to sum up, the way I see it, and reflecting on this as a Jesuit in the 21st century, to be conscious means dialogue, discussion, to exert an influence, and it means to look for justice, and it means to look for love in order to transform and make Jesus...
Right behind you, if you could hand the microphone to the gentleman right behind you. Thank you. And then we'll come here.
My name is Agustin Kalubi from Central African Province. That's Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm very grateful to what Father George said, especially how we went around all the challenges. But I wanted to hear something about the place of faith. We are facing the challenge today, having curricula, as you said, even if they need to be adapted. but they are coming from non-Christian governments. And if a curriculum is coming from the government, somehow you are linked to it and you have to respect it. You can add anything you want to add, but basically you have to follow it. Secondly, we are having in our schools not only students, even collaborators who do not believe neither in God nor in Satan. They don't believe in anything. So the place that you are giving to the spiritual exercises, Ignatian examen, all those things, they are much more Catholic. What to do with our collaborators who are not even Christians, but who are willing to work with us, and maybe are even enemies of God? How to do with them in the school, especially that place of faith?
We're going to, George, I think, was going to respond briefly, and then we'll come here, and in the back I have some.
Yeah, I would like to respond to a few points that came up so far in the discussion. One was, he mentioned about the formation, how we are engaging the same parameters in formation, and whether there is any example from the Indian context. Students who have gone through, or candidates who have gone through, or novices who have gone through this training, whether there is any significant change in the way they conduct themselves. And I have to say, yes. My province, we have certainly gone through various experiments. We closed down our pre-novitiate. We changed the novitiate from the place where it was, took it to a completely remote place. We had the regional theology center where I myself stayed in a family in a village, came to the center to reflect and study. The impact may not be very visible, that those of us or those who are going through that training is making a drastic change, but there is a difference in the attitude that we can notice, especially in terms of relating with people. And when we are talking about the disparity, the economic disparity that we are talking about, such experiences have certainly helped those of us who have gone through that kind of a formation to interact with people. Our attitudes are different. I am not talking from a pedestal down to someone who does not have, but I am at an equal level. That kind of a difference I have noticed. I agree with the common understanding that is being developed, that just being persons of conscience is not sufficient, but that needs each one of us to be proceeding towards certain influence in the society. And I think that is what was referred to when the person from Boston, sorry, I can't remember all the names, and Father talked about the influence and how Jesus is going to be made present. Those things become important. Therefore, our education should not end with what we do in the school, but the effect of that has to be seen beyond the school and the experiences. Now, coming back to the final aspect, how are we going to introduce this Ignatian heritage, the Ignatian values, the Ignatian exercises, the Ignatian examen, when we have a predominantly non-Catholic government interference? We also have people who are anti-Catholic at times. Our situations are multi-dimensional. We have all kinds of people working with us. There are people who are working against us. My suggestion would be, we need to provide these heritage, these legacies, these exercises, not as a Christian, Catholic, or Jesuit exercises, but as exercises, experiences, process that would help the person to form themselves. We are not going to tell them this is going to be a Catholic or Ignatian exercise. For example, the Ignatian examination itself, it is an evaluation of your day's activity and life for us Catholics, for us those who believe in the context of our faith. Someone who is belonging to another faith, he or she would examine his or her life in the context of his or her faith, ensuring that it is leading to certain transformation, certain movement towards the transcendence. We cannot provide these as Catholic Ignatius exercises in multi-dimensional context. It has to be as part of our education process as exercises or processes which help the person to form themselves into persons of conscience. Certainly the other three dimensions also will come along.
Thank you. We have two up front, and then I have two in the back. Two up front, and then two in the back. I'm coming your way. Please make sure and hold the microphone close. Thank you.
Ima Reyes from Colombia. I am really very, very happy on the basis of what I listened to when we talk of conscience here, because I think that you have focused on transcendence, but this is said in a very, very wide sense, because it means not only religion or the Catholic religion, but all religions, and that I really liked, this mention. And then on the other hand, I think that there is this human temptation. What is it? That we go straight to action. We are too impetuous and we don't go through interior processes. That's why I believe that this education in conscience, in awareness, is actually making us do this work within ourselves. And then it means analyzing plans and programs. And so that means that we have to privilege this interior awareness in the teachings to our children. It's an incredible challenge. And I think nowadays it can be mutilating. Why do I say this? Because we are living in a world of noise, of technology, of action, a world in which people don't really privilege this training, this formation of our inner conscience. And I do think we have to go to this teaching of the inner self. The question...
Here up front? Right here? Yes, sir.
I'm Father Antonio from Spain, and I am working at a school in Madrid, at a Recuerdo school, and I would like to continue this theme on the relationship between education and faith, because in our postmodern world and our secular context, I think there is no link between consciousness and the openness to God. And if there is no connection, and we are not trying to build this connection through interior and inner life, probably we should ask ourselves if we are building Jesuit schools.
Thank you. In the back middle, in the yellow, yes.
Rosario Martinez.
Rosario Martinez from Guatemala. For more than a decade, the world is talking about spiritual intelligence. My specific question is if what you, Father George, define on conscience and this educating conscious persons, do we have a parallel here with this spiritual intelligence that people refer to, that means thinking about life and giving meaning and sense to those transcendental...
I think it's you.
I would just briefly respond to that question. We have heard of a spiritual intelligence, spiritual quotient, emotional quotient, etc. in the context of education when they are talking about. I think what we are talking about is something a little more than the spiritual intelligence. They may be talking about the ability of an individual to analyze and understand a situation and a context in the context of their spiritual upbringing or background. I think we are going a little bit beyond. We are not limiting ourselves to our faith, our understanding, our context. We are looking at people who will take the understanding and respond to the situation. So that is the difference we are trying to make. We are not limiting ourselves to the formation alone, but the formation leading to action which would transfer to influence or a transformation in the society.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much, George. My name is Ikenna Ikechi. I'm from Nigeria. I'm from the North West Africa province, and I work in a new school just in the second year. The school rose out of the ashes of the kids who died, 60 kids from our school in Abuja who died in plane crash. I like the imagery you used of the Good Samaritan, especially this distinction you made. One being guide who is conscious and the other person a person of conscience. And I asked myself, but why is one person or a group of persons conscious of a situation and the other is a person of conscience? I think it boils down to fear and love. Fear and love. But that is what I see everywhere. My nephew came back from the north running away from Boko Haram and defines everything in terms of fear. Everything that happens, he responds out of fear. That is, okay, thank you. That is where our world is today. ISIS, Boko Haram, all kinds of evil, and it filters down to our schools. I see it everywhere. People respond either out of fear and out of love. So I'm asking, how can we, address this concretely in our schools, so that we can find a way forward instead of, no matter what we preach and what we say, what we teach. Take for instance, a member of the Jehovah's Witness who considers in Nigeria they see Catholics as the war of Babylon, and they want to teach in our school because they want to make money. They're not ready to share your vision. Now, if I say no, or their kids pass our school, I say no, am I not proceeding out of fear? How do I harmonize? How do I accommodate them and yet push forward in all we're about? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's stay, in the back of the room. Thank you.
So my name is Paul Donovan from Canada, from Montreal. And I'd like to pick up actually on a number of things that have come up. And I also very much appreciate the Good Samaritan image that you gave, and the difference between conscious and conscience. And I think that when we talk about the formation of conscience, it has to be more than just being aware of what's happening in the world. And I think, your example there of people live in circumstances all over where there's radical poverty and all sorts of injustice, and it doesn't affect them. They're conscious of it, but not necessarily conscious. And I'm a little bit afraid that when we lose the root of what the spiritual exercises are about in what we're doing in our schools, all we're doing is making people conscious and not necessarily forming conscience in the process. It isn't enough to just know about things. And the fourth week of the exercises is all about the reason that we do, why it moves to action, is because it's a response to that intense love that God has for me, and I want to give back. If we lose the idea that our action in the world is a response to the love of God, then I'm not sure that what we're doing is Ignatian. The IPP, which is absolutely wonderful and does also, can become mechanical. It can become a mechanical process of implementing a few steps and things like that don't get at that root. And so that's really the point. It's to say that if we don't get to that, to be not afraid of who we are, not afraid of what our traditions are and where our faith comes from, and to let what we do be a response to that love of God, which means that the experience of the love of God has to be there.
Thank you. A good reminder of pedagogy and spirituality together. Let's come up here to the front middle, and then I'll go back there again.
I am Andres Aguirre from Argentina. My thoughts here are that if conscience or awareness is not linked to affection, it will eventually not lead to any action at all. So one has to actually educate the heart, really, more than the conscience. I was really interested in hearing about that poverty tourism issue. I think many of us live that in our schools, don't we? And that experience is there, but sometimes it's not significant. People tend to forget very quickly, and we shouldn't. Second, we should not forget about the evolution that our students live. They are being trained and their conscience is being trained, but of course it will change as well depending on the different stages of their evolution. And maybe the main challenge is that we have to think about the incidents for the years to come. Because of course, when we have our students, the influence is not all that great, but it will be. We have to think of the potential, and maybe many of our students will not even get to the university. In some places, they won't even complete their secondary education, so then that's a huge challenge. So conscience and affection, and then as well the awareness of the evolutionary process.
And then we'll go to Ed.
I am Bill Kameza from Boston. Father George, I have a question for you. Often when, first of all, I thought the presentation was remarkable, and its breadth as well, and its development of conscience. So my question to you is, normally I know when I have to give a talk or do something like this, in the process itself, I am changed. So my question to you, has your view of conscience changed as you developed this look at world religions, at the secular world, at the questions about our own sense of our own impetus for a faith that does justice? How has that changed? I noticed your final, and maybe this is perhaps not necessarily true, but I will say, I think your definition, which was wonderful, also was pretty secular about what is a conscience. And so I'm curious what you would say, how things have changed, if they have, in this for you. Thank you.
I have to confess, I, as a person, may not have changed. But I begin to understand Ignatian heritage in a much deeper way than I understood Ignatian heritage in the novitiate or in the tensionship or in my formation. My experience in formation, it was being given to me, and I took it. This experience was a search. I needed answers. I needed meaning. And I needed something that would make sense to others. In that process, my life is affected. In the sense, there is a desire. Now when I talk about that we need to do something in the school, it comes from within, not from top. That difference certainly it has made to me. The definition that I gave is totally secular because of the surroundings that I live in and work with. That we need to constantly remind ourselves that whatever we do, it is not something that we are forcing on everybody as something Catholic or something Ignatian. We need to deliberately make the difference because of the situation. It is not because of fear that what will happen to us. Because something that we purely give as Catholic and Ignatian will be met with a lot of reluctance from the other side to accept. Now we have regular masses in the school, and I come from a school where only 1,500 students study, and among those 1,500, only 111 students are Catholics, and we still have Mass. We still have the celebration of the Feast of St. Ignatius. We have the celebration of the Feast of St. Francis Xavier, which is our school day. And it is not 111 students who are participating, it is 1,500 students who participate because it is presented at the school day. So we have to be careful about how things are presented to them so that the initial reluctance is taken care of, and then they are involved, and it would eventually influence them.
Okay, I think we have time for one more, Ed. If you would do that, and then I'll do some quick comments before we take a break.
My name is Ed Fassett. I'm from the United States and from the California province. So Father Antonio, I think it was, who said, are we Jesuit schools if we're developing this somewhat secular understanding of conscience and how it fits in the world? And someone else mentioned, the question of formation of our own people for the society, how faith might fit into this, how affection, how are we educating the heart? I guess the question for me is, what is success? How do we know how to measure this? Does everyone have to come out this way? I don't think we've ever measured it that way before. And at the same time, I don't think we should be afraid of recognizing that the work that we do is the work of the Church, the Catholic Church. It is part of the one mission of the Society of Jesus. And we shouldn't be afraid to say that's what we're doing. And if it means there's only a portion of the people who work with us who recognize themselves as being what Father Nicolas refers to as a Ignatian apostolic community in the context of our work, then is that enough? Is that the success that we would like to achieve? Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for meeting the challenge in this first segment of forcing me to cut off the discussions, which means there's much more to be heard. And thanks to the spirit of the conference, just reflect on the fact that in this first 40 minutes of discussion, we have heard from points across the world, and forgive me if I don't remember everybody, Catalan, Guatemala, Spain, India, the United States, Ireland, Colombia, Nigeria, Canada, Argentina, and I'm sure I missed a few. We will now take a 30-minute break until 11:30. I would again remind you to be prompt with the timing so that we can keep those with us virtually engaged on time. We will be back here at 11:30. Thank you.